Hi there. Today I'm going to be continuing the Rails API tutorial. In the last episode, I created a route and I showed you how to curl that route, and I believe we left off with that route erroring because we hadn't created a controller action. So I have the server running here, and just to recap, we have the route set up here for our books resource and the index action. So I should be able to, down here in the console, I should be able to curl http localhost 3000/books, and I get uninitialized constant books controller. So what I need to do is create a controller, and I can do that manually, or I can use Rails scaffolding to generate the controller for me. So to do that, I can do bimrails generate controller, and the name of the controller, which would be books controller, and I can specify any actions that I want to create. So in this case, I just have an index action. So I'll go ahead and run that. And so one thing that's done is actually created an additional route, which I don't actually want because I already have the resource here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. But if I jump over to this new file, books controller, you can see that Rails has generated a books controller, which inherits from application controller, which will be the case for all of the controllers that we create, and we have this index action. So even though this action doesn't have any logic in it, that allows Rails to serve the index action. So it has some default behavior which it inherits from application controller, and we only need to add logic into index if we want to add any additional behavior. What I should be able to do now is run the curl request again. So I'll curl the books controller, and you can see it kind of looked like nothing happened. If I give it -v, so this will do curl in verbose mode, and it will give me a bit more detail about what's going on. You can see I get a 204, so it's actually a successful response code, which means Rails has actually served the request, but nothing's been returned. And I can actually see that as well in the Rails server logs here. So if I just bump that down a bit and I run the curl request again, you can see I have this new log, and it says started a get request to /books, hit the index action on the books controller, and it completed a 204 response with no content. So now what we want to do is actually return something, and seeing as this is an API, we want to return some a JSON representation of all the books in the system. So I can do render JSON, and I can say book all. So this is this book is an active record model, and active records have active record models have many methods added to them by Rails, one of which is all, and that will basically just return every single object that you have in the database. So if I rerun this curl request, localhost 3000/books, I get an uninitialized constant error because book is not defined. And that's what we would expect because I haven't actually defined the model for that yet. So to do that, I can again use Rails scaffolding. So I can do Rails generate model, and I want to generate the model called book, and then after that I can give it some attributes. So let's say, just to keep things simple to start with, I'm going to give it a title, which will be a string, and an author, which will be a string. So I'll go ahead and run that. And you can see that this generated a couple of files. We have a migration, a model file, and some tests, which we're going to ignore for now. If we open let's start with the model. You can see that it's there's not much going on here at all. We basically just are defining the class, inheriting from active record, but just doing that gives you all of Rails's active record magic, essentially. So you have the ORM layer, which maps book to a database table, and you have all of the active record methods. So you can do things like listing all of the books like we're doing in the controller. The other file which gets generated is the migration. And so you can see that this is defining a table, a books table, and we have a couple of fields here, and it's setting the type of those fields. So this is required because the books model in code actually needs a database table in order to store the books that we're going to save in our system. If I was to try and run the server again now, it would error because I haven't run these migrations. So I can run the migrations by doing bin-rails db migrate. So what this will do is, so this has run the migration, so it's essentially created a database table for me with this structure. And I don't know if you noticed, but this file here popped up. So it's a development.sqlite file. Now if I try and open it, I can't read it because it's just a binary, but essentially Rails ships with SQLite 3 as the development database. It just makes it really easy for you to start building things without having to set up your own database. So SQLite stores data in just plain files, essentially. So that's how we're able to start working with a database. When we save and update records, they're just going to be saved to this file here. So now, if I run the curl request again, so we actually get back. I'll take the -v off of it because it will be a bit easier to read. And I don't know if you can see that, but we're getting back an empty array. And if you think about it, this is kind of what we would expect, because in the controller we're returning all books, but we don't have any books in the database to return. So Rails is simply returning an empty list. This is good because the response should be consistent if you have 0 books, then we return an array. If you have 1 or more books, you return an array with some books inside it. So what I can do now is open up the Rails console, and this will allow me to interact with Rails directly so that I can create some data. So I can just do book create, and again, create is a active record method which is added on to book. I can say author. I can't think of any books right now, so I'm gonna have to make myself the author. And title. Let's go Rails API. Who knows? Maybe I'll write a book one day. There we go. So that book has been created. I can exit the console, and if I run the curl request again, there we go. I make the request here, and I get the array again, and now we have this single book being returned here. So I think we'll leave it there for this video. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.